Hi everybody, my name is Brady and I'm a 19th century American historian and we are back with another React video and I forgot my Santa hat. How am I going to do a Christmas video without my Santa hat? I am so glum right now. Oh well. Today we're going to be talking about the World War I Christmas truce in a video by Extra History. I believe it's a two-parter, so we should be cranking out part two as soon as I get around to it. I found a place with some Wi-Fi, so I'm able to get a little bit of recording done this week. So I'm kind of excited about that. So this is a story that I know, I guess vaguely. It's one of those stories that gets passed around a lot. I think I've seen more fictional interpretations of this story than anything that was like documentary based or anything I've actually read about it. It's such a famous truce that it has kind of been done to death in feel good Christmas stories. So I don't know what I actually know about it. I mean, I don't know how much there is to know. I'm not great with military history myself, so I guess it would be good to know the military situation there. I understand there was like trench warfare and stuff, but to maybe understand a little bit more background behind that would be cool. But from what I'm aware, the soldiers on opposite sides, they just like hung out and played. In America, we call it soccer. They played football. And I believe exchanged some stuff. But besides that, I don't really know all that much more about it. I don't know how much more there is to it. Clearly, there's 2 episodes, so there's more. So I'm not going to waste any more time. This intro has gone on for way too long. Let's get it started.
Christmas Eve, 1914. The war was supposed to be over by now. This little holiday special is brought to you by World of Tanks. Use the invite code ARMISTICE if you're a new player who wants to check out the game. The Christmas truce is one of the most poignant events of the First World War, a time when men rose up above the madness of the conflict and, for just a moment, saw each other as fellow humans.
I like this story. As somebody who studies 19th century, I guess the event I'm about to say is 18th century, but I think of like Washington attacking the Hessians on Christmas. Like, no mercy, bruh. But this is more of a feel-good story, and I kind of like it, especially in a time when military is far more developed, and there's a tendency to see people more as, I guess, military capital than as people. I mean, it's always been like that, but think the more mechanized warfare has become, it really has changed the view of the individual.
This is an event that definitely did happen. Thousands of men laid down arms in the truce, but a century of retellings has also kind of sanded down its rough edges and oversimplified its messy reality. Indeed, this event wasn't just the result of pure human spirit and holiday cheer. It was a host of unique factors that drove these enemies to spontaneously declare peace in no man's land. And really, it may not have been all that spontaneous. Small armistices were happening every day. As frontline troops became accustomed to the rhythms of trench warfare, they learned that looking the other way now and then could bring a shred of safety and calm to their lives.
Yeah, I don't get to follow trench warfare too much in my field of study, but I know it's very monotonous. You'll get little bits of action, little bits of movement, but not by much. It's very rare that you get the big charge and you take over. That's obviously going to be a rare thing, because if you get that, you've made some serious ground. So I'm not surprised by this, especially in a war like World War One, which at this stage I know people are getting tired of. It's weird. How could you not be tired of war? But you know what I'm trying to say.
The armies ate meals at the same time, which became a daily ceasefire. Patrols frequently ignored each other, adopting a live and let live attitude. Troops often shouted to each other across the lines. After all, the autumn battles had passed, and both sides were waiting out the winter. In reality, the weather was the primary enemy for both sides. The high water table at Flanders meant that the trenches were always filling with water, sometimes collapsing and burying men inside. Soldiers leaned against the walls to sleep, trying to keep themselves out of the wet.
I've heard about trench foot. I don't know how it's exactly caused, but I believe it had something to do with moisture, right? Something like that. Oh, that must have been hard to stay away from.
Food supplies had to be hung up on dugout ceilings. And that winter had been particularly miserable. Weeks of rain flooded the dugouts. The mud pulled men down like quicksand. Now, British
Dude,
Field Marshal Sir John French had noticed the
heh,
hands-off
that's
attitude
great.
his men were developing towards the enemy, and so he ordered attacks in late December to boost morale. And this resulted in heavy British losses. Concerned about possible
It probably boosted somebody's morale, just not his guys. The other guys are probably feeling pretty good about it. Or maybe not. Maybe they feel really bad about it, but oof. Yeah, that's one of the things with trench warfare. The biggest risk seems like moving. And that's kind of why it stays so much. If you do try to strike, you'd better have some sort of crazy advantage, because that's how you get your guys mowed down. So nobody moves. Very little movement in general, I guess.
fraternization over the holiday, he issued orders that no unofficial armistice would be tolerated. Morale was much better over in the German trenches. After all, they
Yeah.
were winning. But many men were also experiencing their first holiday away from home. Knowing that this would be difficult, commanders brought Christmas to the trenches, shipping thousands of presents to the field. Each man received a gift from the Kaiser: cigar boxes for NCOs, a pipe with the Crown Prince on it for the ranks. The British, for their part, received a brass box from Princess Mary filled with cigarettes, tobacco, a Christmas card, and sweets.
I'm sensing a theme here. Like, most of it is smoking related. Oh, what an unfortunate generation. I guess it's still bad, but there's not nearly as many smokers around now. I don't think. I'm pretty sure it's gone down. No, I don't know. I don't know those statistics at all, actually. Never mind anything I've ever said.
And then there were personal packages. Enterprises sprang up on the home front, offering family members a chance to send gift boxes to the troops.
Aw.
British soldiers received plum puddings and 1,000-count boxes of cigarettes.
Jesus
German and Austrian troops were bombarded with chocolate and salami and cognac.
That sounds way more appealing. Like I'd take anything I could get if I were in that position. This is one of those things in history. You don't get a lot of feel good moments in history. History is like a constant down note where we're getting. I guess things get better over time generally. I think that's a pretty good rule here. If you're thinking about the past as better, something must have really gone very poorly. Because most generations tend to do better than the previous one. In a sense. Of course, there are always going to be exceptions based on the circumstances or whatever.
Sides received winter clothing. In truth, though, the gifts were kind of a nuisance. I mean, there was nowhere to put it all. Soldiers didn't have a place to store 1,000 extra cigarettes.
You got so many cigarettes.
That Christmas Eve delivered a true gift.
Is that the first time somebody invented one of those mega cigarettes where they just light the whole thing and just smoke the whole whatever? Because I've seen those things where they make those little cartoon cigarettes where they just wrap them all into one thing. I'm sure people did that.
The rain stopped, and the trenches drained. Dry cold froze the mud into a hard surface, almost like a floor. Snow dusted the countryside. That afternoon, the gunfire dwindled, and in some sectors it stopped entirely. The weather just seemed too nice for it. The Germans, stuffed with Christmas chocolate and cheered by the weather, started putting lit Tannenbaum up on their trench parapets. And then the German line started singing. Over on the British parapets, watchmen of the Scots Guard saw lines of lights along the enemy trench. At first, they suspected an attack, but then they heard an ethereal sound drifting across no man's land. Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht, the original Austrian version of Silent Night.
Okay, and the British would know what they're singing. I mean, it's a very recognizable melody, even if they don't know the words. They know what's going on here. Oh, okay. This is I love these little feel good things because it's like, oh, music breaks barriers. It spans languages, and that's absolutely beautiful. History is like such a constant down note, and this is like one of those rare cases where you get to look at a moment in history and be like, "Ah, that's nice." Especially during a war, how often do you get to do that? Even victories are bittersweet because of all the suffering that goes along with it.
Sensing a challenge, Guards Officer Lieutenant Sir Edward Hulse decided that they should drown this out with their own carol. The sides went back and forth, but soon the competition merged into a harmony of Good King Wenceslas and Auld Lang Syne. The men began shouting Christmas greetings across the line, jokingly at first. A few even stepped out to talk. Hulse didn't know it, but the same thing was happening up and down the entire British line. Agreements formed. In some sectors, the officers met at the wire and shook hands, agreeing to cease hostilities the next day. In other areas, the ranks took the lead, Germans shouting across no man's land, "English, tomorrow if you no shoot, we no shoot." At times, it was just one brave soul walking into no man's land waving a newspaper.
I guess they have the issue of are they going to be punished for this? And I never heard any stories about any officers or whatever, anybody in charge in trouble for this sort of thing. Maybe some were. That would be an interesting thing to learn about. There's a whole part 2 to this, and we're getting into like basically the bulk of anything that I would have kind of known or was implied in stories that I've heard about it. So I wonder how he does a whole nother episode on it. I wonder if there's like a big fallout. But if there's so many people participating, it's one of those things like it's probably hard to crack down. If people got cracked down upon, it was people kind of on the higher end of the food chain, I would assume.
These overtures were extremely dangerous. Though peace was breaking out in certain areas, it didn't happen everywhere. One British regiment responded to German caroling with a machine gun blast.
Oh,
Some
that's
unarmed
nice.
soldiers were gunned down trying to broker this holiday armistice. But in most sectors, the ceasefire held. This truce mostly happened between German and British units. The French and the Belgians, whose countries were under German occupation, were less inclined. There were agreements to bury the dead and cease hostilities, but not as much fraternization.
Oh yeah, that's like a really important thing, right? Like a lot of ceasefires, not just in this conflict, but in a lot of conflicts. It's like let's stop, bury our dead, and do what must be done here. That's actually interesting there, and that's a very good reason to, or even if you want to be, I guess, cynical about it, you could be like a good excuse to make peace for a day.
Yet a Bavarian unit held fire during a French mass, and both sides halted fighting long enough for a guest, a soloist from the Paris Opera, to make a performance. British Indian troops, who were a bit unfamiliar with this whole Christmas deal, saw the lit German trees and thought of their own holiday of Diwali. They held
Oh,
fire, but also held position, until some Germans tempted them out of the trenches with cigars and cigarettes. Soon the men were smoking together on the parapet. That Christmas night, the troops slept in sublime quiet. Christmas Day dawned, bright and cold, the sky clear for the first time in weeks.
one thing I wonder that doesn't really get addressed in any version of this story I've heard, uh, what was it like after? When the ceasefire is over, like, how did people behave going back to good old warfare? Because I'd imagine once you've shared this moment with people over there, like they've been humanized in your eyes. It's so much different. I would love to see, and I know there's tons of like journals and diaries and stuff during this time, and there must be something on it. I would love to see something on that because I'm sure that was a bit jarring once you have something like this. What happens when it goes away? How do people react? And I love hearing the stories from the people kind of in the trenches, in the sense, in any form of warfare. I think that's one of the most interesting perspectives, and it's also very elusive depending on which groups you're looking at and at what time period.
To their shock, British troops looked across no man's land to see the Germans walking around on their parapets.
Huh.
Such a thing was suicidal in daylight, and that gesture of trust, more than anything, lured a few British out. It was heaven to at last stand up straight and walk on solid earth. Some had ventured into no man's land on Christmas Eve, but in daylight it was impossible to ignore the bodies lying between the trenches. The two sides buried their dead in common graves, grieving side by side in joint services, listening to the faraway sounds of battle from other sectors. And that shared experience broke down the wall. Soldiers milled about together in no man's
There we
land,
go.
swapping overabundant gifts from home. British beef for uniform buttons, chocolate cake for barrels of beer. They exchanged hats. One German barber gave haircuts. The men chatted. After all, they shared so much in common. They lived in the same fields under the same rain, and they were equally sick of war. Besides, they were curious. What was life like on the other side? Who were these enemies? One British officer was perplexed to learn that his new German friend believed the armies of the Kaiser fought for freedom. That was impossible, the officer responded. We're fighting for freedom.
And this is what I'm saying. Like, once you've humanized the other side, once you realize, hey, we're not all that different, you and I, how do you go back? I just don't know how that's even possible. There's a level of discipline in military life that I've always found very difficult to relate to, but no matter how much discipline you have, it would take a particularly unfeeling person to not have some, I don't know, maybe regret, some thoughts regarding that.
Amid this, Lieutenant Hulse found himself talking to Lieutenant Thomas of the 15th Westphalians, who had something to pass on. A Victoria Cross and a packet of letters. An English officer had died in the German trench during the last attack. Perhaps he could give these to the man's family? Touched, Hulse removed his own silk scarf, a gift from home, and presented it in thanks. Thomas, embarrassed that he had nothing to give in return, sent a soldier to fetch the fur gloves that his family had sent. Up and down the line, men started bringing out footballs. Kickabouts broke out, with men from both sides chasing the ball among shell holes and sliding on the frozen ground.
There we go. And if there's anything that Europeans have in common, pretty much no matter where they're from, it's football. And it's weird. I'm an American and I'm not typically a fan of sports. If I were to play a sport for fun, that's my outside of like I wrestled in high school or something, but outside of that, I think that's football, soccer. That's always been kind of my favorite. I've always had a soft spot for that. And it's not very popular in America, so I guess that doesn't really go anywhere.
In one sector, a group of Highlanders challenged a Saxon regiment, who burst out laughing whenever a kilt flew up during play. But not all of this activity was goodwill. On both sides, a few used the gatherings to reconnoiter enemy trenches, and both sides used the time to repair dugouts. Of course, for some, this fraternization appeared false. One British soldier flashed his squad mate a hidden dagger, while another refused to smoke German cigarettes, fearing that they might be poisoned. When one squad of Bavarians discussed whether to meet the British, their corporal snapped at them. Such a thing should not happen in wartime. Have you no German sense of honor left at all? They weren't surprised. The night before, the same soldier had refused to join the unit's Christmas service. Corporal Hitler was odd like that, but his disapproval reflected...
Oh, okay. I was wondering what he was going for there. That was like actually Hitler we're talking about? I've heard some stories about him, and he was obviously deeply nationalistic. You don't need me to say like he was. That's like everything that made him up. So I guess
the general's view. This was exactly the situation that Field Marshal French had feared. Commanders dispatched senior officers to threaten disciplinary action and insist that the men restart the war. In some sectors, the armistice came to an orderly close. Officers from both sides saluted and fired revolvers into the air, signaling that, all right, the war was back on. In a few places, troops resisted until nearly to New Year's Eve, but the generals would not have it.
Okay, I thought it would be something like that. I felt like you would need a little bit of cool down. You can't just have a hard line in between palling around and fighting. I mean, maybe it could go one way. You go from fighting to palling around, but going from palling around to fighting again, I'd imagine it would take a little bit of cool down. You need the feelings to subside a little bit. You need to get back in the mood to murder your new friends. You know, that sort of thing.
German command dispatched snipers to break the ceasefire. French ordered an artillery barrage, letting the machinery of war roll over the human connections of the frontline troops. Nothing like
That's
this
depressing.
Christmas truce would happen again. The generals wouldn't allow it. On Christmas Eve 1915, British officers ordered a 24-hour artillery barrage. Men who tried to form a truce were court-martialed. Machine guns drowned out German carols. But the generals needn't have bothered. The spirit of that truce was unique to 1914, a symptom of a young war. By Christmas 1915, those troops had experienced chlorine gas and creeping bombardments. Zeppelins were bombing London. The Battle of Verdun would end just before the holiday, leaving 750,000 casualties.
It's so weird thinking of like war on this scale. As an American, thinking of war on this scale happening where you're from, I always think of war as happening like out there. They go off to war. America has been fortunate in that sense, I guess, since we've had like little incidents. I'm not gonna say little incidents. We've had some pretty significant incidents, but they're few and far between, I suppose. The American mainland has not been attacked in a long time. So that's something so very foreign to us. It's very abstract, despite the fact that we've been at war pretty much almost my entire life.
Indeed, many of the men who celebrated in no man's land that day would never see another Christmas. One of those unlucky ones was Lieutenant Sir Edward Hulse, who had sung carols and given a German officer his silk scarf. He died 3 months later while trying to save a wounded comrade. He was 25. And yet, Hulse is not remembered today for his military achievements, or even the book of letters that his friends published after his death. He and so many others are remembered for a victory entirely their own, when a group of brave men ventured into the line of fire, trusting their enemies not to shoot, and believing that humanity was better than the bonfire it had built for itself. Happy holidays, everybody.
Thanks, guys. I really enjoyed that story. Wait, how is there more of this? I'm confused. 1 second. Alright, so I found part 2, and I had to look this up before, because I am going to be doing this pretty soon. Letters from the Trenches. Okay, that makes a whole lot of sense. I was wondering, like, he went through pretty much the whole thing there. How could we possibly have more? We're going to go into the letters, which I think might be even more fun, because you get more specificity. One of those hard words. Alright, so yeah, we'll do that next time I get around to doing one of these, and hopefully that'll be before Christmas. If all goes well, as if anybody who's saw my last video, I am not really settled down anywhere right now, and I think I'm going to be recording a little bit from here. I don't really have a setup. I just kind of threw my computer on a table and sat on the floor. So that's a thing. But I'm going to hopefully get together a decent setup so I can continue recording consistently. Because I've not missed a day for a very long time. And I'm going to do my very best to make sure I don't miss a day unless it's on my terms. Alright. Thank you guys for watching. Like this video if you like this video. Subscribe for more. Let me know what extra history videos you want me to check out in the future after I do the Christmas truce. And any other Christmas videos or holiday videos in general you want me to check out before the holidays have concluded. Let me know in the comment section below. And I will see you guys next time. Later.